Okay, hi students, this is Professor Wyant, this is your History 1301 class, and as you remember we were talking about the American War of Independence. Okay, so I'm going to quickly review some slides and then get to the part that you need to learn about for this week. Okay, so next slide please. So as you remember, the French and Indian War is leading to the American War of Independence, okay? There's consequences to the French and Indian War that lead the colonists to push for independence from England. So the colonists are feeling unhappy with the mother country, with England, after the American War of Independence. And the Boston Massacre, okay, it's not really a massacre, okay? A massacre is when there is hundreds of people, but the colonists are calling it a massacre because they want to emphasize that the British are wrong and bad and we should rebel against the British and become independent. So what happens is the colonists have been protesting these higher taxes. And so they're becoming rebellious, and the British don't like this. The British want to keep their control of North America. They don't want to lose these colonies. Okay, so rebellion isn't okay. And the colonists are rebelling and protesting about these higher taxes. So the King of England sends troops, okay, sends the military to patrol cities in the colonies. So you've got British soldiers walking around these cities like Boston, you know, with their guns, and the colonists are upset again. They're now upset about this. They were upset about the higher taxes. Now they're upset that the British troops are walking around their cities watching them. And so you have this situation in Boston where the colonists are upset with these British troops. It's winter time. The colonists start throwing snowballs at the British troops, and it escalates, and somehow the British guns go off. Somehow about 5 people get killed. The colonists blow this up and say this was a massacre. There was a massacre in Boston. Look how bad the British are. Okay, so this gives incentive to those who are pushing for independence. Next slide, please. Another protest that the Americans do against the British is the Boston Tea Party. Okay, this is protesting the taxes on tea. So the British control the trade in tea, because remember, the British also have a huge colony in India. The British are controlling this gigantic subcontinent of India where tea is grown. The British are sending tea in ships to the Americas as part, remember that whole triangle trade, okay, with products moving around the Atlantic? Well, a whole bunch of British ships come into the harbor in Boston in crates of, on the ships are these big crates of tea. And there's now this higher tax on tea that the colonists have to pay, and they don't like this. So to protest, this is another way they protest these high British taxes, is a handful of these colonists decide to dress up as Native Americans at night, climb onto these ships in the Boston Harbor at night, and dump these big crates of tea into the water. Okay, so they're ruining the tea, they're dumping it all into the water, and it's a protest that becomes called the Boston Tea Party. Okay, so this is just another example of this kind of rebellion that's going on in the months before the actual War of Independence. Okay, next slide. Okay, so key players in the war. Okay, what you've got to realize is not all the colonists just wake up one morning and say, oh yeah, independence, that's a great idea, we're all for it. It is a debatable thing is it going to be good to push for independence and actually have a war with England or not? Should we do it? Should we not do it? Okay, so there's a group called the Patriots who want to push for independence from England. Okay, the way you remember that the Patriots are the one that want independence is to be patriotic, okay, is to want to sort of wave your flag and say, you know, I'm proud of my country. Okay, they're wanting to create a new country. They're wanting to create what becomes the United States of America. The Loyalists are another group of people living in the colonies who are loyal to England, who don't want to push for independence. Okay, so you remember that the Loyalists don't want independence, okay, because the word loyal, okay, means that they're loyal to the mother country, to England. And then there's the Neutralists. Okay, to be neutral means you haven't decided. You're just in the middle, you're not for it, you're not against it. Okay, so there's colonists who are also neutral, who haven't decided, or maybe they're pacifists, like the Quakers, and they just don't believe in war at all. Okay, so they're just not going to get involved. The Quakers would be neutral in this case. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the British are a highly organized army. They've been fighting wars on 5 continents and winning. Remember, the British won against the French in the French and Indian War. Okay, so the British are a very organized, they have a very organized army, very professional army, and the colonial soldier is very different. Okay, the United States hasn't been created, so the colonies each have their own militia, a volunteer army, but it's not like they have one big organized professional army. Next slide, please. So for the colonists to go up against the mighty British Army is a big deal. It's going to be really difficult for the colonists to win against the British. So the first fighting, keep pushing the buttons until everything shows up, thank you. The first fighting between the British and the American colonists happens in a place called Lexington. What happens is the British soldiers, who we talked about are in Boston, they hear that American militia, okay, these groups of colonists who are volunteering for local militias, they've been gathering weapons, and the British soldiers are told you need to walk through the countryside down to this place called Lexington and confiscate the weapons, meaning take the weapons away from the colonists. And so the British are marching through the countryside. The colonists learn that the British are showing up, and all these young and old militiamen in the colonies, who are mostly farmers or shopkeepers, they're not professional in the army, they show up in an area in the countryside with their weapons, waiting to meet the British troops who are walking down. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to stop watching my lecture for a minute, and you're going to click on the PowerPoint on this link and watch this video, which is a reenactment of what it might have looked like when those first shots were fired, when the colonists meet the British in this area in the countryside. You're going to watch this reenactment of that, of what it might have looked like. Okay, now, after you're done watching that, we're going to talk about this issue that historians have of who fired the first shot, who really started it. In that meeting that you'll see on the video, did the British start firing at the colonists first? Did the colonists start firing at the British first? And this is a debate that we're going to talk about. Okay, so we're going to pause this, you're going to watch this, and then you're going to come back to this video. Okay, so you've watched that video. Now, on this slide it says read Lieutenant Barker's diary and read Nathaniel Mulkin's account. Okay, so you're going to find these two things that you need to read. You're going to find them on the end grade calendar. And what we've got here is two accounts of what happened. One by the Lieutenant John Barker, an officer in the British Army, okay? And one by this young colonial guy in the militia called Nathaniel Mulkin. Okay, so he's the American colonist. So he's saying from the American side what happened, and the British guy is saying from his side what happened. And what I want you to do is read each of these two accounts and answer some questions for me, okay, that you're going to just write down by hand and bring into class when we meet next. And basically, the questions are on the slide. So what does each one claim about who fired first? What does either side describe? Does either side describe that there was resistance, okay, by the colonial militia? And why might you trust or not trust these accounts? So again, the issue is that historians are debating who fired first, and you're going to be reading these and writing down what each one says about who fired first. And you're going to then be answering the question of, did it really seem like the Americans were able to stand their ground against the mighty British Army? Did they have to just flee? Did they have to just escape? Okay? Did they have to just run away, or were they able to stand their ground and fight back? Because remember, they're not an organized professional army, and the British are highly trained and professional, and so it's a difficult situation for the Americans. So try your best to answer these questions from reading this, write down your answers, bring them in to class when we next meet. Okay.